Well, thank goodness we finally have a solution to America's gun problem. Hi, I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, Senator Elizabeth Warren, who happens to be a candidate, one of the leading candidates for the Democratic nomination for the presidency, has released a plan that's designed to reduce gun deaths by, get this, 80%, Bill. 80%.
Okay.
You certainly will be in favor of this because fewer people are going to die.
I will be in favor of the result. I'm not quite convinced I'm in favor of the
techniques. Well,
yeah.
the upshot of it is, Bill, that the way this works is that we increase taxes on handguns as well as on ammunition quite substantially. They're already pretty substantial taxes.
Right, got it. Okay, I got it.
Yes. So
Yeah.
in order to, the reason why Elizabeth Warren picked this 80% target is because that in the 1960s, Congress decided that the number of people dying in automobile accidents was too great, and we've been able to reduce by some 80% that number. So there are two elements to this, Bill. And number one is essentially confiscatory taxes. I'm looking for the number here. Warren would raise the tax on guns to 30% from 10%. Handguns are already taxed at 10%. And the tax on ammunition to 50%. Bill, this seems like a good idea coming from the Democratic Party in the sense that it would take the opportunity to buy handguns and ammunition out of the hands of the little guy who doesn't have much money. Doesn't that sound great?
Where do you start with this?
I mean, the rich can still buy guns and ammo.
Well, so Elizabeth Warren and her bodyguards are covered then, thank God for that, and so is Nancy Pelosi and Zuckerberg and all the rest of them. They'll be rich enough to be able to afford the ammo. So let me just ask you something here. Let's just take, I'm not going to take a specific person. Let's just take the kind of people that show up as these shooters who've been planning this stuff for 2 years or whatever. And let's say that Elizabeth Warren raises the tax on ammunition so that every single round of ammunition costs $100. Okay? And let's say that an AR-15 costs $10,000. By the way, she's talking about a tax, which means that guess where that money goes? That money goes to Elizabeth Warren. It goes to Elizabeth Warren to decide what to do with that money, but put that aside. You have somebody who is suicidal, who's ready to end their lives, who's ready to mass murder innocent people, watch little children get blown to pieces, watch women throwing themselves trying to cover their babies and shooting through them. You've got somebody who's willing to do that, but they're going to be deterred now because there's a tax on guns, because guns are going to be 15 or 20 or 30% more expensive than they used to be. In other words, I'm ready to commit mass murder, but the one thing I certainly don't want to do is commit tax fraud, for God's sakes. That's a crime. They have to continue to come up with something because there is a fundamental, absolutely obvious problem for them. And their problem is this, just so we can all be clear on this. If two different things move in the same direction, that means a correlation. Doesn't mean that one causes the other. It may, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it causes the other. So, what do we have? What is just on the table as genuinely known? Well, we know that as time has gone by, the number of mass shootings has increased. And we know that as time has gone by, the ability to get a gun has become smaller and smaller and smaller. It's become more and more difficult. As I've said 500 times now, pretty much every high school in America had shooting clubs in the basement down below. And you could walk into a hardware store, let alone Sears or Penny's, walk out with as many rifles or handguns as you could carry. So guns have become harder and harder to get a hold of. Number of mass shootings has gone way, way up. Clearly, the restriction of guns is not restricting mass murders. I'm not saying it's causing them, but that's the line of correlation.
Well, see, I thought you would find common ground.
So what else is causing it? What else has changed in the last 30 or 40 years? In other words, if guns have been getting harder and harder to get a hold of, well, what's changed? Well, the two things that psychologists are pretty clear on with this is, number one, a person who was going to commit suicide, a lonely person, a person who feels like the world has always ignored them, never paid any attention to them, people with little hatreds about this person and that person at school or at work, all of that stuff. Those people used to commit suicide because this kind of thing was unheard of, but now if they decide to commit suicide, they'll be famous around the world. Their picture will be everywhere. Their names will be mentioned, and we'll learn all about them. We'll get to find out what they went to high school with, and we'll get to read all of their political screeds, searching for answers for why this happened. So you have just given the chocolate factory golden ticket to people who are violently suicidal and turn them into violently homicidal. And this is not me speaking. This is what the FBI forensic psychologists say in terms of what the nature of these shooters is in terms of their mental makeup. But the one thing that nobody wants to talk about is that I don't know what the number is. It's something like 26 or 27, 26 out of 27, somewhere in there, of these mass shooters have come from single parent families. Not only have they not had a good father, they haven't had any father at all. And if you want to address that problem, now you're going to have to go where the liberals live. You see, throwing guns into the volcano to appease the murder god doesn't cost them anything. It's no skin off of their nose. People like Elizabeth Warren are just lined up, ready to ban anything that they don't use. But if you want to get down to the root of the problem, if you want to look at the data and the evidence, and you see what do these people have in common, and what are we seeing more of as we see more mass shootings? It's not availability of guns or ammo. It's the increased presence of 24-hour news coverage of these horrific events, and it is the ever-growing number of young men who don't have fathers in the house. And if they do have fathers in the house, many of these fathers are not the kind of guys who would make men. Men aren't born, males are born. Men have to be made, and we used to do a pretty good job of that. And as we continue to do a less and less and less good job of that, we're going to have fewer men and more males. And these males are going to be filled with the same hormones and the same aggression and the same everything that young men, put into things like playing football. But no one's ever taken the time to teach these young males how to be men, and so they're going to go out there and be predators, and then they're going to have to be stopped by men. That's what's happening. And if you want to get to the heart of this problem, you better go out and try and restart the man factory. But doing that, of course, would be to completely invert everything that the left has told us for the last 40 or 50 years. So maybe if we put a tax on guns, maybe people won't murder anybody anymore.
Well, it seemed to me that I thought you might find some common ground with Senator Warren on this, if only in this...
Seems unlikely, doesn't it?
If only in this aspect of it. Not in general, in broad strokes, but in this particular aspect of it. Because when you raise the tax on an item, you increase the difficulty of getting it for those people who can least afford it. And so if a Glock handgun goes from, let's say, a good one, $900 up to $1,200 because of a 30% tax on that, then the people who are going to be hardest hit aren't middle-income suburban people or wealthy people, or frankly, these mass shooters who are almost always white suburban people. The people hardest hit are going to be the poor. They're going to be folks in the inner cities. They're going to be the folks who can least afford to buy the guns. And Bill, you've pointed out before that nobody really wants to talk about the mass murder that's happening on a daily basis in America's inner cities, and all the focus goes onto these isolated incidents of multiple fatality shootings that happen in big numbers, usually by white people.
I have decided that I'm going to take the advice of FBI forensic psychologists, and I am not going to do any of the things that 24-Hour News Service does. I'm not going to mention any names. I'm not going to mention any numbers. I'm not going to rank them or score them. I'm not going to do anything. They're not ever going to come across my lips because I'm determined to try and see these things come to a minimum, despite the fact that the left is doing everything they can to make more of them. But I took a look at the number of people who were murdered in Chicago in 1 month, and it turned out it was one person more than the 60 people that had been killed in Las Vegas. So you get one Las Vegas mass shooting, not across the country. In Chicago, you get one every month.
And a lot more killers.
But those people don't count, you see. They don't count for the Democrats because they are black people, and they already control these neighborhoods. The reason that they're killing each other in these record numbers in these places like Baltimore, Chicago, St. Louis, Detroit is because they've been run by Democrats for 100 years, and the Democrats don't give a damn about these people. They've basically pocketed the money necessary to keep the neighborhoods just functioning, let alone clean. So what they want to do is they want to do anything that makes their fantasy come true. Their fantasy that this is all about the guns. When in fact, as I pointed out, the murder rate in Plano, Texas, which is probably the most heavily armed neighborhood in America. I'd be willing to bet you there are more guns per household in Plano, Texas than just about anywhere else in America, which means anywhere else on the planet. And you find the murder rate there is well below. It's something like 0.8 murders per 100,000 people.
Nevertheless,
in Chicago, it's 55, Scotty.
The El Paso shooter went to high school in Plano, Texas. Ironically enough, lived in nearby Allen, Texas. But that's neither here nor there. It just wonders me what Elizabeth Warren is trying to accomplish here, Bill, because essentially, by jacking up the taxes, you not only penalize the poorer people who can't afford to pay more to buy themselves a weapon of self-defense, or even, frankly, for recreation, but you're also then bringing in probably millions of dollars from Republicans, largely, not always, into federal coffers.
Yeah, always.
Shouldn't Elizabeth Warren see this as blood money that they don't want to have in the federal treasury?
What Elizabeth Warren is doing is she is being true to her political instincts. And every time I start to think that there's some kind of like deep master plan behind what these progressives do, and I start looking for it, and then I just keep coming back to this golden rule, which is never attribute to evil or malice what can be easily explained by just sheer stupidity. What she's doing is three things. Number one, she's showboating. She's showboating for her election because she has decided that she's come up with a plan. And Scott, not only does she have a plan, she has a plan that's going to reduce these mass shootings by 80%.
That's a number.
That's a number, yeah. That's a scientific number. I think if she would have been smarter, if she would have said 82%, but, we'll just let that go for the time being. So number one, she's showboating. I'm running for president against 25 other lunatics and morons, and in order to stand out, I have to be able to show the lunatics that are going to vote for me that I have a plan to stop gun violence, so I'm going to raise taxes on guns. I think you should spend a lot of that money on putting up no murder here signs. I think that would help an awful lot according to their logic. So number one, she's showboating for votes. Number two, she's doing what she is just naturally inclined to do, which is to find a way to take more money from honest Americans who have not committed any crimes or done anything wrong and put it in the federal government where she gets to decide where to spend it. And since she gets to decide where to spend it, she'll spend it in places where she will reap the benefits of those people having that largesse by voting for her for perpetuity, and she'll undoubtedly die in office. And the third thing she's doing...
At a ripe old age.
Yes, obviously. 7 terms from now. Well, she's already at a ripe old age, Scotty, but nevertheless, put that aside. That's what I'm talking about. When I say die in office, I mean die of old age in office. And then the third thing she's doing is adding to this, is actually kind of showing their cards, because this is not an anti-crime measure. This is to the degree that it would suppress weapon and ammunition sales. And my feeling is it wouldn't suppress it by much, because when I hear things like this, it makes me want to go buy more ammunition, not less. When she does something like this, she again tilts the hand of the progressives and the left in this country, because they don't see the shooters as the problem, and they don't see the murders that take place in Chicago as the problem. They see a bunch of conservatives who cannot be rounded up and put into camps or loaded onto buses and sent to special places. They see that as a problem because these particular set of victims happen to be heavily armed, which is why they're not victims, which is what they can't stand. In other words, if she has the ability to make the law, and she does, and she decides, like all other progressives, that she's going to determine how other people are going to live, okay, Unfortunately for her and the progressive movement, and for authoritarians and dictators and tyrants in general, unfortunately for them, she may have the force of law, but when it gets down to when rubber hits the road, the force of law is going up against the force of self-defense, and armed people are significantly harder to murder than unarmed people, and this upsets them greatly. Which is why we always hear about gun bans, we always hear about gun control, we always hear about gun restrictions. We never hear anything about going after the shooters, going after the kind of people who going after the social causes that created these things. These shooters are the product of progressives taking over society. They wanted to have welfare for mothers, complete welfare for women who were unmarried, and okay, I can certainly have a lot of sympathy for people in that position. But if you're going to pay people to have more children out of wedlock, then guess what's going to happen as a kind of collateral damage to this.
So there are two more elements. There are two more elements to Elizabeth Warren's plan, and maybe this will sway you. Number one is that we want to not just raise taxes on guns and ammo, but also appoint an attorney general who will investigate the National Rifle Association's use of, quote, loopholes to divert member dues into lavish payments for its board members and senior leadership. And then the second is her plan says we need structural reforms, including ending the 60-vote requirement to end a filibuster in the Senate, because that's what you're going to need to have. You can't have the filibuster require a supermajority in order to pass comprehensive gun violence legislation. Do you think those two elements will make it happen?
You're talking about the Harry Reid option, right?
Well, the second one, the 60-vote threshold for ending a filibuster.
Right. Okay, let's take them one at a time. Elizabeth Warren wants to. First thing out of your mouth is Elizabeth Warren wants to get an attorney general that will ...
investigate the NRA.
Yeah, but that's not what I was getting at. An attorney general that will do anything other than doing what they should be doing, which is investigating the highest level corruption in the FBI, the CIA, the IRS. Jeffrey Epstein managed to somehow not give his testimony about who went with him on those airplanes and all the rest of that stuff. So by all means, let's take the Department of Justice off of things like that, like the fact that Bill went to this island 20 times or something and Hillary went 6 times. Let's not worry about those little peccadillos. Let's have an attorney general that's going to spend the full power of the federal government investigating an organization that is essentially a free association of people who try to keep their rights, and I'd be willing to bet you that the average NRA member is an enormously more law-abiding individual than a random citizen on the street. So what she's doing there is transparently obvious, and furthermore, it gives her a chance to demonize the NRA, which gets her the votes that she was going to already get. But much more importantly is your second point, which has slipped my mind for the moment.
She wants to end the 60-vote threshold needed to break a filibuster because there's no way she's going to get her gun control regulation passed into law if that exists.
So for those of you who may not know the intricacies of this, and Scott, when I say Scott, I mean real Scott, mild-mannered reporter Scott, not liberal Superman that he plays on the show here. The idea that you had to get to 60 votes instead of just 51 was through the filibuster and so on. This whole dynamic was essentially a handshake agreement, because a lot of people in Congress back when this country was a little bit healthier saw that this might be a useful thing on some contentious issues to have to clear a higher bar. But it was never law. It was never determined by the Constitution. It was never put there. It was what we used to call a gentleman's agreement. And a lot of ladies lived by that gentleman's agreement as well. And then several years ago, Harry Reid, as leader of the Democratic Party, decided that he wanted something very badly. And so he pushed what we used to call the nuclear option, but now which I call the Harry Reid option. He basically said, since there is no law making us have a 60-vote majority, since it is entirely tradition and comity and goodwill and patriotism and all the rest of it, but I need this vote So I'm going to break with a tradition that goes back 100 years or more in order for me to get this cheap little vote. And he did. And by doing that, he destroyed the 60-vote agreement, which was a handshake. He destroyed it. And a number of people at the time on our side of the fence said, well, Reed, if you want to destroy this, if you want to push the nuclear button to get your vote, in other words, the nuclear button is we're going to throw away 100 plus years of convention and civility and agreement. And we're going to throw that out. And we're going to go with the strict letter of the law. And all of that stuff that we've all abided by for all of this time, we're going to throw away because you are saying it's not really law. What is law is, we need 51 votes, and he had 51 votes. He didn't have 60.
And by proposing that, Elizabeth Warren is essentially betting that not only is she going to win the White House, but Democrats are going to take a bare majority in the Senate so that they will be in charge of the Senate. But they know they won't have enough votes to defeat a filibuster, and so they just want to be able to do it with that bare majority she's banking on having.
That is the tactical situation. You got it absolutely right to a T. But the strategic situation is much simpler than that. The strategic situation is this. If the rules favor Democrats, obey the rules. If the rules need to be broken in order for Democrats to have something that they want, then break the rules. If it looks like Republicans will benefit from the change in the rules, then change the rules back when it becomes beneficial to Democrats. And they get away with it because we don't have any press in this country, because there's no press. Because there's no press determined to bring down powerful people. There's only a press determined to bring down powerful people who are Republicans and to not only not report on the misdeeds of Democrats, but to actively cover it up. So this is the world we live in now, and that's the way it is. The filibuster was useful for them until it wasn't. So Harry Reid destroyed this tradition, and it's gone. Now she wants it back because they need it again. The law helps the Democrats, then the law helps the Republicans, so we have to change the law. Then it helps the Democrats again, so we have to change the law back again. If you don't get what you want, change the law. Simple, nothing to it. This is what people without morals and standards and without any sense of integrity do in politics. And this is why they've gotten as far as they can, because people like us continually look at this and say, but that's dishonorable, that's cheating. You say something like that's cheating or that's dishonorable, and they don't laugh at you, Scott. They don't know what you're talking about. They don't understand. It doesn't make sense. What do you mean dishonorable? What do you mean cheating? It gets us the power, right? Yes, but it's against the rules. Yeah, but we can get away with it, right? Yeah. Well, then let's do it. Are you out of your mind? So this is the world we live in. This is the fight we fight. And this example on the part of a champion of this diseased philosophy is a pretty interesting subject for 15 or 20 minutes to talk about how and why they work and what they want to do. They want your money and they want power over you. And this was an example where she said, hey, wait a minute, we get two birds with one stone here. We tax guns. Not only do we get the money from the tax, but we also reduce gun ownership to some degree, but it's a twofer. I think it's a grand idea. Let's run on that. So we have a candidate, like all the rest of the candidates in the Democratic Party, whose campaign promises are to remove freedom from the American people. That's what their platform is. And if we are not capable of speaking in terms that make that clear, then we deserve everything that's coming our way.
Well, if Elizabeth Warren does get elected as president of the United States and Democrats do take back the majority in the Senate, we don't know for sure whether we will actually have an 80% reduction in gun deaths in this country. But Senator Warren has a fairly good chance of making a run at overturning or toppling the number one gun salesman in American history, and that is President Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. This is probably the best thing that she can hope for in this situation.
Yeah,
ladies and gentlemen,
sell a lot of guns.
The members at BillWhittle.com, who probably buy a lot of guns as well, also contribute some of their money to sustaining this enterprise and making it possible for people around the world to see these messages. We are grateful to their administrations and their contributions to this enterprise, and we invite you to become one of them by going to BillWhittle.com and clicking that Become a Member link. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thank you.